welcome to Chapter 4. We're going to be discussing global management and how we manage across borders. So this is a great chapter. Make sure you have your notes to write with, something to write with. You have your little snack so that you don't have to get up and pause me 20 times. And let's go ahead. I have my ginger tea with honey that I'm going to occasionally sip on. So let's go ahead and dive into this chapter. And let's see. So by the time you're done reading this chapter, hopefully by the time you're done listening to me, you will be able to identify 3 influential effects on globalization, describe the characteristics of a successful international manager, outline the ways in which companies can expand internationally, discuss the barriers to free trade and ways that an organization can overcome them, or at least try to, and explain the value to managers of understanding cultural differences and how to develop your cross-cultural competency. Remember that this is an interactive video, so there will be, questions that'll pop up that in polls and things of that nature. So be on the lookout for those, and let's get ready to really jump into this. So, looking at this table here, we see that we're talking about globalization, and this is the trend of our world economy towards becoming more interdependent. So where countries can stand on their own, but they also lean on each other. And with that, the goal is, well, the goal should be that all of the nations of the world are part of an interdependent system, and not that there are any that are dependent. And right now, of course, as you know, there's a lot of nations that are dependent upon other countries. So the table that you see right here, table 4.1, is the country rankings for competitiveness. And this is from 2016 to 2017. I noticed they left off the G in Hong Kong. I just noticed that the textbook left off the G in Hong Kong. But this source that they got this from is from the World Economic Forum. It was part of their report, and it indicates that the U.S. is 3rd in terms of global competitiveness. Now, it shows the country rankings as 2nd here. But I believe that we probably have dropped to 3rd. So, we're listed as 2nd in the country rankings here. I think we bumped up one, or we bumped down one, however you want to look at it. Something else that you may look at is whether or not you believe that the U.S. is the richest in terms of gross domestic product. And so gross domestic product is the total value of all goods and services combined that a nation produces. And interesting enough that the U.S. was at that time ranked number 9, and so we were behind Luxembourg and Qatar and Singapore and Norway, the UAE, which is the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, and Hong Kong. And I can't believe they left off the G. And then Canada had been 20th as far as the wealthiest as far as GDP. So now, what something that most people don't realize is that the largest um, generators of GDP in the United States come from primarily the two largest drivers of GDP in the United States come from two states. One's on the West Coast and one's on the East Coast. And let's see, I'm going to have the quiz, a little poll to see if who thinks which states. I've already given you a hint. One's on the East Coast, one's on the West Coast, the two states. And the answers are California and New York. So those are not saying that those are the only drivers of the GDP, but they are two of the largest drivers of the GDP in the United States. Matter of fact, California's GDP is like towers over a lot of countries. So that's just a little fun fact to add in there. Now, when we look at the rise of the global village, what we're seeing is that the world is getting smaller in the fact of its being the ability to shrink time and space because we're having air travel, we have electronic media, we can video conference, so on and so forth. And so it's making it easier for people to communicate around the globe. When you look back 25 years ago, 30 years ago, cell phones, pagers, fax machines, voicemail links, they barely existed. I mean, we had like big fax machines, but you did not have a lot in households. And so it's really interesting to see how we've turned into a major mobile force. And one of the continents that have some of the largest mobile cellular subscriptions happens to be the continent of Africa. It's a highly mobile, dense environment, which a lot of people don't know that. So I'm going to throw that little factoid to you as well. But by 2015, there were nearly 7 billion mobile cellular subscriptions. Like, is that not crazy? So when we look at that we have about 7.4 billion people in the world, that means that 43% are internet users. They are cellular users. So do you guys feel more connected globally? I mean, those of you that are from other countries or have family in other countries, I'm sure you feel connected that way. But do you feel more connected through the use of social media and other platforms because of the technology? And do you see yourself in the future, taking on a job on a national level or or anything of that sort, working somewhere, maybe overseas, or working for a global enterprise? That is definitely something. Maybe I'll plant that seed in your mind. When we look at e-commerce, that's where we can buy and sell products and services through our computer networks. We see that the U.S. Sales were estimated for 2015. They were estimated about 342 billion, and that was an uptick of 14.7% from the previous year. And then when you look at all of the Asian countries, and understanding that Asia also includes India, that they account for nearly half of the world's mobile online shopping, which is about $230 billion annually, and that's in US dollars. And so we can look at how technology has changed the way we think about global commerce. Maybe you feel that you could reach the world with your products and services instead of just, reaching out to US consumers. Maybe you will have a global impact. Now, what you do have to look at is what impact all of this will have in the coming years as you evaluate your earning potential and your career opportunities, just looking from the framework of e-commerce. This is definitely the age of business, an adjustment period. So there's literally no limits to what you can do because you now have an electronic store of sorts. There is an example in your textbook. It's on Alibaba, and you can read about the data centers that are in the U.S., but um, they haven't done more to really engage in talks with other organizations about growing their network. So there's an interesting example that you can read about there. And we have to, of course, we have the global economy. There's always positive and negative effects. The positive effects is that, of course, we're then more interconnected. That can lead to better and more affordable products, better communication amongst nations. We can increase the tendency of the economies to interact with each other as one market instead of many markets. The negative side of that, of course, is that there's a lot more outsourcing of formerly well-paying jobs that go overseas as companies primarily in the US are seeking out cheaper labor cost and especially in manufacturing. So there's a negative to that as far as it impacts the US. You know, there's also some tendencies of saying that if you have one global market, how does that impact other national markets? Because if whether or not they can stand on their own, or how that translates. So there's a lot of ways of looking at that, but of course the biggest negative effect is the one that I just shared. Now, something else that we look at is that mergers are on the rise, right? We're seeing a lot of companies that are merging together. You're seeing these mega firms that are growing, so industries are becoming bigger, and which is interesting because we say that you're not supposed to have a monopoly in the United States, but we're seeing that there's organizations that, as they keep merging and acquiring, that they are forming monopolies. And they're talking about how they can divest and break some of them up. But look at some of the industries that the automobile industry, healthcare, telecommunications. That's the big one right there. Because especially since they're having a cross global reach. We also see that many firms are operating worldwide, and that allows almost anyone to be global because of the internet. They're starting more easily, and they can maneuver faster. And so with the ability to travel anywhere and connect with anyone using the internet, what we're seeing is that they're having ability to sell their products globally. And I know I've had students from previous semesters who are from other countries, and so they live here, and they go to school here. And so of course they operate their business globally that way. And then I have students who, they're from the US, but of course they sell products globally. And you can look at all sides of that stone to see the positives and negatives from your viewpoint, from the viewpoint of your consumers, and from the viewpoint of the workforce in your local or extended family network, right? There's an example in the textbook that's managing your career. We can get the edge on in the global job market. So that is something that you want to check out. And basically, some of the tips that they provided, some of the skills to land an international job, is that you can brush up on your cultural awareness and foreign language skills. Um, Most people that I know of that are from other countries usually can speak on average 3 or 4 languages. So that's something that Americans really need to work on, is their ability to speak multiple languages. Um, I used to speak um, Spanish and a little Kiswahili. So my Swahili is now kaput, and my Spanish is um, it's good enough to get me in trouble. But I definitely need to um, work on both, as well as some other languages that I've been trying to pick up on. But another skill is to be able to demonstrate our flexibility. And that's one of the most important skills that you need when you travel and work abroad, is the ability to be flexible. A lot of times Americans can think that they're flexible, but Americans a lot of ways are very rigid and conservative. And so that inflexibility can be at a detriment. Third thing is to find out whether your current company has positions overseas, and then research the possibilities and requirements of these jobs. This is also key if you are not married, you don't have children, or you have a spouse who is willing to pack up and go, right? And say, let's go ahead and take this journey. So if you have one of those two um, avenues that you can take, then I definitely say jump on it sooner than later. Fourth thing is to build your network of people who work for companies that have overseas opportunities, and basically tell them what you're looking for, and what you can bring to the table, and you never know what kind of opportunity may come your way. And then the fifth thing is to look into jobs that have entry requirements that you may already meet, such as tutoring or teaching English abroad. I know a few people that did that. One young lady, she was in Abu Dhabi for at least 2 years. I don't know if she's back or not from there, but she had been there teaching English. So these are some of the things you can consider, and just kind of think about some of the key challenges in pursuing an international job after graduating from either Atlanta Technical College or a 4-year college or university. Now, there's a question that's on your screen. You'll see it's going to pop up. Another one's going to pop up for you to be able to type in, but I'm going to read this to you. Jolene sells art through her own website and her Etsy store. She receives questions from many different countries. Jolene is engaged in, is it A, e-commerce, B, global trading, C, counter trading, or D, an embargo? All right, that's enough time. So let's talk about the international management aspect. We have multinational corporations, and those are organizations that have operations in several countries. Some of those include the publisher of this textbook, McGraw-Hill Education. It is owned by Apollo Global Management. Of course, the largest American multinational corporation is Walmart. Then we have ExxonMobil, Berkshire Hathaway, Chevron, Apple, McKesson, GM, General Motors, Phillips 66, General Electric, and Ford Motor Company. Those are some of the largest that we have. There's more, but those are some of our top ones. And then we have multinational organizations that are nonprofits that operate in several countries. So we have several examples here, but two that we have include the World Health Organization and the International Red Cross. Now, when you think about international management, you have to ask why you should learn about it. And some of the reasons that you should is because you may deal with foreign customers or partners So you really need to understand and have a global perspective and broaden your thinking. You may have to deal with foreign employees or suppliers, or you may work for a firm that's foreign headquartered, but it's has location in the U.S., or vice versa. You may work for a U.S. company, but you're working now outside of the United States. Okay, or hey, you may actually find yourself working in another country. So for a foreign country, for a foreign country, for a foreign company. So these are the different reasons why. And as we keep saying, since the world is getting smaller and smaller as far as our outreach, these are ways that you can definitely navigate through all of those waters. Now, there's going to be many opportunities for you to interact on a global scale, and some of you already are. But those of you that aren't, I want you to really embrace that idea and be, more than willing, but quite excited at that concept and the prospects that can come from it. So we focus on learning how to be a success over broad. There was a survey that was conducted by DDB Worldwide in more than 100 countries that found that respondents repeatedly mentioned that their perceptions of Americans were arrogant, loud, and uninterested in the world. And in a lot of ways, that's true. It's so true. Um, it is so baffling when I speak to other Americans, and I'm just like, wow, I totally get why people think the way they do about us. Being successful overseas requires you to take time to learn about the culture of the country where you are visiting, where you hope to do business. And, this is a fair characterization of Americans. Not all Americans, right? But this is a fair characterization of some Americans. And, so it's, of course, not all Americans, but some. And so we definitely need to do our part to combat these stereotypes by following some of the tips that you see on the screen, which is how you go about developing a global mindset, is to be patient and quiet and listen. Try to reduce the amount of slang you use in the workplace, especially. So, we come up with all these different phrases, TikTok phrases, or however you want to look at it, right? We come up with all these different phrases and terminologies, which is considered slang. And it does not necessarily translate well or at all in other languages or in other cultures, right? So making sure that you take on a more professional stance. And then something else that Americans have a tendency of doing is talking about wealth a lot. And when you talk about money, that is where we are more liberal about talking about it. It just flows out of our mouth. While in other countries, they're more conservative about that. A lot of that is more of a private, personal type of thing, or it's just something that is just not flamboyantly just spoken about as though you're talking about a cup of tea. So just, being mindful of that. Making sure that your focus is global, but that you are very, very intentional on studying the local customs in that area. There is nothing more offensive than to see then we have a tendency of doing this. We go to a different country and we want things to be Americanized, and we don't realize that no, it's not. So just like when people come here, nothing is then transformed to align with their customs and ways, right? So it's making sure you study up on those local customs and you're respectful of them. If you can't respect them, don't go there. Okay. And learning what's appropriate behavior as far as eye contact, gestures. Oh, goodness. The hand gestures, the facial expressions, different things that um, you can do that could send the wrong message. Learning various rituals of respect. In some areas, a handshaking, others, it's not. How to dress appropriately, what is dressing appropriately. So making sure that you're staying up on that and trying to at least gather a few words in that language. So whether it's, thank you and goodbye, hello, excuse me, um, bathroom, different things like that, just so that it shows your desire to want to be part of, that you're embracing that you are appreciative to be there, right? Because you are a guest there. When we look at the different types of managers and management styles, ethnocentric managers believe that their native country and culture and language and behavior are superior to all others. This is related to parochialism. It's a really narrow view in which people see things solely through their own perspective. And this can, they tend to believe that they can export the managers and practices of their home countries to anywhere in the world. Just Americanize it, right? Or just, whatever it. And that they'll be more capable and reliable. However, it's, the viewpoint is less attributable to prejudice than it is to ignorance. Since, managers obviously know more about their home environment than the foreign environment. So it just being ignorant. Polycentric managers take the view that native managers in the foreign offices best understand the native personnel and practices, and so the home office should just leave them alone. Now, when we look at ethnocentric managers, the question is whether or not ethnocentrism is bad for business. And there was a survey that was conducted by 918 companies, and they had home offices in Japan and the US and Europe, and they found that ethnocentric policies were linked to problems such as high turnover rates, recruiting difficulties, and of course lawsuits over personnel issues. When we look at the polycentric manager, they too can run into pitfalls. When you have a really big global company, it's important that your management is cohesive, that it has stickability, and that is important for success. So when you look at these two, are either of these the right way to be? And you can see that they both have major pitfalls. So what is the alternative to these two? And that would be a geocentric manager, where you're accepting the differences and similarities between the personnel at home and the personnel that are in the other country, or the personnel that are coming from the other country, and as well as the practices, both home and abroad, and that they should use whatever techniques are most effective. This is a blending of cultures and management techniques, and this can lead to a very successful global presence when you're taking a geocentric approach. So here's our next question. Alvin accepts that differences and similarities exist between home and foreign personnel and practices, and that the company should use whatever techniques are most effective. Alvin can be described as, what is it, folks? Ethnocentric, polycentric, geocentric, or as an expatriate. All right, good job. Moving right along. So, why do companies expand internationally? I mean, we already talked about lower labor cost, right? You can get someone, you can get labor for less than minimum wage here in most instances. So looking at the list, of course, we see that we have availability of supplies. So overseas, you have raw materials for your products that may be cheaper. You may actually have more access to those supplies. In new markets, you may find more demand and more customers for your products overseas. As I mentioned, the lower labor costs. You can see that the in Mexico, you have the maquiladoras that they have manufacturing plants that allow for them people to operate in Mexico with special privileges in in return for employing Mexican citizens. There's access to financial capital, which you can find overseas investors can help grow your business. You can, of course, avoid tariffs and import quotas. For the most part, we do know that the U.S. government was trying to do some switcheroos to really like slam dunk to try to fix that loophole. But countries place tariffs, and tariffs are fees on imported goods. They can also impose import quotas, and those are limitations on the numbers of products that can be allowed into the country for, and that's done to protect their own domestic industries so that you're not now bringing in more products from overseas that then limit. So all of a sudden there's a flood of products coming in from another country, and that your own domestic products can't be sold because the ones that are coming in from overseas are most likely also going to cost less. And we've already seen that here in the US because I'm sure if you look under your laptop or look at your ink pen or your phone or whatever, your cup is going to most likely say made in, and most likely it's going to say China. You may see some other countries, but it is rare to see made in USA for most of the products that we have in the USA. And that's because we've chosen to be an importer more than an exporter. And it used to be the other way around. But the reason why we have these import quotas and the tariffs um, is to create those types of, you know, restrictions. To avoid these penalties, what a company might do is create what is considered a subsidiary. So they would create another smaller company to produce the product in the foreign country. So they just set up a shop in another country. Um, some companies that have done this are Whirlpool and General Electric, and they have foreign subsidiaries to produce appliances overseas. And then that's how they avoid the penalties. So you see how that can kind of snatch back the the U.S. Domestic worker and the potential jobs that they don't get because those jobs are now overseas. Now, figure 4.1 shows the 5 ways of how to expand internationally using both the lowest risk in investment and the highest risk in investment. And you see that each of these we're going to cover in the following slides. But I wanted to make sure that you see the example that's in the textbook about global outsourcing, and it's looking at which jobs have fallen victim. And you can see that there's certain jobs like face-to-face jobs such as salespeople or emergency room doctors. There's certain traits that you possess, right, that you see as prevailing in a fast-changing world. Physical contact, such as dentists, nurses, massage therapists, gardeners. High-end products that require intensive research, precision assembly. complex technology that you need skilled workers. And then, of course, we have complex patterns, which require humans to recognize them, and it's hard to automate. So maybe it's a physicians diagnosing diseases or teaching. Trust and believe they're trying to find a way to get some kind of robot to take over that. But for the most part, we see that these are still definitely some areas that can be outsourced. Now, looking at the top 10 exporting countries, this is from 1999 and 2016. This is table 4.2. And some countries' ranks have stayed relatively the same in the last 15 plus years, while others like China and South Korea and the United Kingdom, they've definitely increased in their export of goods and services. This chart that you see is from World Trade Statistical Review that was in 2016. We've been ranked number one as an exporter in the world in 2015. We were up from number 3 2 years earlier. And maybe you can guess why. Why do you think? 2015, it was ranked number 1 as an exporter. 2 years prior to that, 2 years prior to that, in 2013, we were ranked number 3. So what do you think the change of that was from? So I'm going to go ahead and give you the answer. So the U.S. is a leader in exporting American pop culture. So you have fashion, music, movies. We're also a leader in exporting computers and other information technology services. So those are our 2 areas of export that keeps us cranking out. It's really weird because movies and music and fashion, with such this creative blend, half the time I don't know when an artist is from here or not. Like, if you didn't know, you would think Adele was from here or whatever, right? There's just certain artists that you don't even know they're from the UK. So we export it, but we also have a lot of artists that are not from here that we export their information. But it's interesting that it's entertainment, basically, is the core of that. Of course, the computers and IT is high on that, but it's really weird because if you look at what we import are the things that middle America is struggling because they can't take part in that job creation and job attainment. Because when you look at movies, music, and fashion, that's basically coming from 3 core areas of the country. That is primarily California, New York, and you can say Atlanta. And that covers your pop culture, where it's culminating from. And then you look at, and well, not the fashion. The fashion is definitely New York and California, but movies and music include Atlanta in that. So we have a lot of work to do to make sure that in our export, that it is more consumer-based goods as well, because we sure are major importers of consumer-based goods beyond entertainment. Gosh, it's kind of sad, the transition. Now, how we expand using global outsourcing, which is also called offshoring. This is how we use suppliers outside of the U.S. to provide for the goods and services and labor. And then importing is where we buy goods outside of our country and we resell them domestically. And then exporting is where you produce the goods domestically and you sell them outside your country. And then counter trading is where you barter for goods for goods. So you do a swap. And on the lower risk and investment side is, global outsourcing, importing and exporting. In some cases, counter trading is an easier first entry into foreign markets. The companies are run domestically, but they, can do business with foreign countries, and there's generally no ownership abroad, so it's just business dealing. So these are the ways that you can navigate through those waters. Now, when we look at licensing and franchising, um, licensing is when you allow a foreign company to pay a fee to make or distribute your product or service. And franchising allows a foreign company to pay a fee and a share of the profit in return for using your brand name and a package of materials and services. So in the textbook, there's an example for licensing, and there's the DuPont Chemical Company, and how they might license a company in Brazil to make Teflon, which is that nonstick substance that you found in a lot of your frying pans. Well, DuPont would be the licensor, and they can make money without having to actually invest large sums of money into the business directly, um, or to conduct business, directly into a foreign company. But the Brazilian firm, they would be the licensee. And so since they know the local market better than DuPont probably would, it's like it just makes better sense because that's their market. And so at that point, they have that advantage, and you, it's like, hey, as long as you're doing well and doing good and making money, do it the easy way. Now, an example of franchising, you have your Hilton hotels and Hertz and Burger King. There's other franchising brands that are well known that can provide use of their names, plus their operating know-how. So you can use their equipment, their recipes, their management systems, their facility design, and they can then franchise that out to companies in other countries. So in the textbook, there was an example about how those three companies could franchise out to companies that are in the Philippines in return for an upfront fee plus a percentage of the profits. So we see those types of expansion globally. Then we have JVs. Those are joint ventures, and that's formed with a foreign company to share the risk and rewards of starting a new enterprise together in a foreign country. Now, let me be very clear. These are the same types of entities that you have domestically. This is looking at how you take those same types of entities, the licensing, the franchising, the JVs, and expand them internationally. So in case you're like, wait a minute, and I'll go back really quick. You're like, well, there's folks that do licensing deals here in the U.S. It's not with a foreign company. Yes, this is looking specifically at using the same type of mechanisms, but now putting them with a global spin. So making sure I'm crystal clear with that. So with the joint venture, and I've done joint venture deals here in the U.S., I have not done a joint venture deal with an overseas entity. I've taken part in licensing deals, some other things, but I haven't done a joint venture deal foreign. But these can also be called strategic alliances, and in either context. These are the joint ventures are another way to expand. They can fall in a higher risk investment category because you're forming a new enterprise, right? Together, and you're doing so in a foreign country. So it's riskier than outsourcing and import, export, and licensing or franchising. It's not as high a risk as if you have a wholly owned subsidiary, which we're going to talk about. But it's definitely, up there. Now, I think I kind of gave this away, but why do you think that a JV would be more risk than, the licensing and franchising, but less riskier than a wholly owned subsidiary? So that's something to think about. I already gave you the answer. So a wholly owned subsidiary is totally owned and controlled by an organization. That is exactly what it means. And you have the greenfield venture, which is a foreign subsidiary that the owning organization built from scratch. It's not represented on this scale, but it is related to the wholly owned subsidiary. I just wanted to make sure that that was covered, because it is right there as the highest risk and investment on the scale. So here's your next question. XYZ Corporation builds a manufacturing plant in Mexico. They employ Mexican citizens and they receive favorable tax treatment by the Mexican government. XYZ is what? What's the answer, folks? What's the answer? A, B, C, D. All right, moving on. So, the world of free trade. We have our top 10 nations that the U.S. exports to, and the top 10 nations the U.S. imports from. I already gave you the answer to this second one earlier. And this was based on, as you see on the chart, we have this for 2018. Goodness. As of 2016, it's table 4.3, and that was the census according to the U.S. Census Bureau. So looking at the list, we export mostly to Canada and Mexico, which we shouldn't be surprised because those are our bordering countries. And then third on the list is China. And you can see then what rounds out the top 10 is Brazil. The top nations that we import from, China, are, like I said, Mexico, Canada. It makes sense, right? These are our bordering. Well, China's not our bordering nation. It may feel like it, but Mexico and Canada are. Japan, as you see, is equalized both in export and import of our products, and their products is right there at 4. And then Germany, UK, and South Korea just kind of like an interchange, a flip-flopping of where they are right there. What's interesting is that we don't import much as far as when you look at the top 10 from the Netherlands and Hong Kong and Brazil. However, we do from India, Italy, and France. Our Italy and France is I would say would be primarily clothing based products, furniture, household, as well as India. But it's just really interesting. They make up our top 10 imports, but not our top 10 exports. So the question is that is this an untapped opportunity for U.S. businesses? Are people sleeping on them? Because you definitely could help to generate a greater export to those 3 nations. So we have to look at what barriers might be at play. And we're going to discuss barriers in just a moment. So some of the barriers could be tariffs, as we mentioned earlier, right? So those are the taxes or duties that are levied mainly on imports. One type of tariff is a revenue tariff, and that's designed simply to raise money for the government. So that could be a tax on all imports into the U.S. The other, which could be a protective tariff, which is intended to raise the price of imported goods to make the prices of your domestic products more competitive. Then we have import quotas, and that's the limits on the numbers of a product that can be imported. And quotas are designed to prevent dumping. And this is the practice of a company that exports abroad at a lower price than the price that's in the home market, or even below the cost of production, in order to drive down the price of the foreign country's domestic product. We had a lot of issues with that with China. They had been doing a lot of dumping here, and it was driving our domestic price down considerably, and actually pricing us out of our own market. So that's another reason why we end up having a lot of stricter quotas in place for that. Embargoes are complete bans on trade between one country and another. That could be how recently we weakened the embargo from the US to Cuba. So now it makes it easier for Americans to trade with and travel to Cuba, because remember, we had a trade embargo forever um, with Cuba. And with it being so close to our country, it's like, oh my goodness. But there are sanctions that can actually prohibit any type of product or service um, being traded. And so, of course, the biggest type of reason for that taking place would be like the nuclear proliferation. So when we placed trade sanctions on North Korea to prohibit the export of any material that could help them in their nuclear program, is an example. Now, WTO, and if you noticed, the WTO was referenced on one of the earlier slides. It's the World Trade Organization. It's designed to monitor and enforce these trade agreements. And, it's interesting because the former President Trump had wanted to do away with the NAFTA, the North American trade agreement that we have with Canada and Mexico. But they really was like, it was really about, dismantling the relationship with Mexico. But if you just saw who we export mostly to, we make a lot of money off of Mexico and Canada, right, in our export. So it was just really and we make a lot of, and they make a lot of money off of us as well. But it's just interesting how, that just got caught up in a web. But there are agreements that are based on, tariffs and trade, GATT. And it's an international court that 23 nations signed in 1947. And currently it has grown to 164 countries. They have it headquartered in Geneva, Switzerland. Switzerland is the, it is the no-go zone, as far as it is a neutral zone. So that's the reason why you'll see a lot of things in Switzerland. And when you look at situations like the one on the last slide, right? We talk about the sanctions and the embargoes and the quotas and the sanctions because of nuclear proliferation. How does the world regulate itself to be fair to everyone? And so you have the three principled organizations that are designed to help facilitate international trade, which are WTO, the World Bank, and the IMF, which is the International Monetary Fund. All three come under attack by proponents, by people that have issues with all three. And, it just is what it is. Now, when we look at the WTO, can you guess why an international accord may have been desirable in 1947? What was happening in 1947? Can you guess? I'll say it was just after World War II. So we were doing a lot of we were doing a lot of rebuilding um, globally, right? So that was a reason why that was definitely beneficial to have that accord. Now, the World Bank was founded after World War II to help European countries to rebuild, right? And today, the purpose is to provide low interest loans to developing nations for helping to improve with education and health and transportation and telecommunications. And it has 189 member nations. Most of its contributions are coming from the US, Britain, and Japan and Germany. There have, of course, as I mentioned, there have been a lot of people that are proponents against. They've had protesters complain that the World Bank has financed various projects that could damage the ecosystem. So you have the Three Gorges Dam that's on China's um, Yangtze River that they've complained about. There's also complaints and protests that so that there was that the World Bank supported countries that permit low-paying sweatshops or that suppress religious freedom. Other people think that the World Bank has dragged its feet on getting affordable drugs for AIDS treatment to less developed countries throughout Africa. Um, they've been accused of lending millions of dollars to a palm oil company in Honduras that was accused of links to assassinations and forced evictions throughout Honduras. And then in 2014, the World Bank had to do a major overhaul and reorganization to encourage better collaboration and a quicker response because they were under major attack for those issues. And then they announced that they were going to nearly double their lending potential to developing countries in India, China, and Brazil. So it'll take time to see how the World Bank really evolves and um, if it can redeem itself from you know what it was, what the purpose of it to help countries rebuild, and then taking into consideration um, some of the things that has been linked to in recent years. IMF, another organization, as I mentioned, it was designed to assist in smoothing the flow of money between nations. Founded in 1945. It is now affiliated with the United Nations. And of course, if you know, the United Nations is here in the United States. It's where they all meet. It operates as a last resort lender that makes for short term loans to countries that are, you know, they're about to go belly up. So, like Greece, before Greece literally destabilized itself, um, they really do work to try to shore up some of those weaker European economies. And that's what actually brought IMF to the forefront in people's periphery, because they made loans to Greece and Portugal and Ireland, and they were considering how they could further assist Spain and Italy, right? And so people started hearing about the IMF that they probably didn't know about before you saw this almost explosion in the EU. So these are definitely organizations to research, to form your own opinions about. Um, I used to teach a economic development class at Emory University. It was um, class. It was economic development in Africa class, and so these were the three primary organizations that we would study and research and follow, and students had to do a lot of um, research, and we in that class we had 5 textbooks not big books like yours, but like they were smaller books. Um, but that they'd have to go through over the course of a much longer semester time. But it was always very interesting to see how much the students really gathered from studying about these three organizations. Now, you'll also read about major trading blocks. And a trading bloc is a group of nations within a specific region geographically, and they've agreed to remove those trade barriers with each other. Earlier, I mentioned NAFTA, right? So you have the North American Free Trade Agreement that flows between US, Canada, and Mexico. So we just have a free flow of goods and services. There's no barriers between us. And this was what you had some people wanting to dissolve. They wanted to break up that block so that we'd have to form a um, a barrier of trade and make it more formalized and yada yada yada. I think it would have caused even greater um, acid reflux amongst Americans if we actually realized how much we benefit from our free trade between Canada and Mexico. EU, we had European Union, and there's 28 borderless trading partners in Europe. Well, sorry, 27 because Britain did their exit, their Brexit. We don't know how that's going to how that's going to impact Britain later. Some of them are still on the high of that, but by them exiting from the EU, we'll see how that works. Um, in the textbook, you can read more about Brexit and really think about the advantages of being a single market like the EU, and the disadvantages for member countries if you see it as such or not. And then APEC is the Asian Pacific Economic Co-op, and that is 21 of the Pacific Rim countries. And most of the countries that have that Pacific coastline, that along the U.S., Canada, China, like that along that Pacific line right there. And then you have the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. That's 10 of the Southeast Asian countries, which of course it would include India. And then Mercosur is the largest trading bloc in Latin America. And then you have the Central America Free Trade Agreement, which includes DR, the Dominican Republic. So it has all of Central America and the Dominican Republic. So these are the major trading blocs that have no trade barriers amongst themselves. Now, of course, intermixing of these, there are the various barriers that we've talked about earlier. When we look at TPP, you may have heard about TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership that was signed February 4th, 2016. That was an agreement amongst the 11 Pacific Rim countries. We withdrew from that pact under Trump's administration. The other members that make up TPP or Australia, Brunei, Canada, Chile, Japan, Malaysia, Mexico, New Zealand, Peru, Singapore, and Vietnam. And yeah, so so we'll see what happens with TPP, whether or not under President Biden we realign into that pact or not. But there's arguments pro and con for TPP as well. Now, when we look at the most favored nation trading status, that really describes a condition where your country grants other countries a favorable agreement and treatment such as they'll reduce the import duties. And so this is where if this is something that is that's in addition to or excluded of, if you come together in a trading block, this is something extra. This is something a bonus point, right? And the purpose is to promote stronger and more stable ties between the companies in those two countries. So you'll see various relationships such as that. It's just like the cherry on top of the sundae, or the whipped cream and the cherry on top of the sundae, if you want to look at it that way. Exchange rates. So those of you that travel overseas, those of you that are from other countries, of course, you are very familiar with exchange rates, and some of you are really good at calculating those mentally. Some of you, of course, just snatch out your phones and use the exchange apps and things that you have. But it is the rate of currency of one area or country, and that can be exchanged for the currency in another area or country. So a dollar, US dollar, trades equal to 1 British pound, right? And so something that costs £3 in the UK can be bought for $3. If the exchange rate changes so that a dollar buys at 1.50 pound, then an item that costs £3 can be bought for $2. So that means in that example, the dollar is stronger. But if the exchange rate is so that a dollar buys only half a pound, then an item that costs £3 must be purchased for $6, which means the dollar is weaker. So the key here is that we want, if you're in the US, we want the dollar to exchange at equal to or preferably higher than a dollar, right? Than one. So in 2016, for instance, the exchange rate for a dollar was 89 euro, 80.89 euro, right? And our dollar is weaker against the euro because it's not equal to or higher than one. So that is just one of the things that we look for. So we're always looking for one or higher. When it's less than, it weakens our dollar. So the exchange rates are constantly fluctuating. You can find several websites and apps that offer current exchange rate calculators. But that is really what we push for in the US, is we're always looking for how we can get that higher exchange so that our dollar is weaker. Not weaker, our dollar is stronger for us. And of course, every nation wants their currency to be stronger in that trade. You don't want to lose money. You don't want to buy something that you feel that, could cost you $2, but now you're having to, pay $6 US for it. So those are the things that we're always looking at. Now, we have the BRICS countries. These are the 5 major emerging economies: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. It's coined by a financial analyst as promising markets for finance capital in the 21st century. It represents about 40% of the population of the world and about 20% of the economic activity of the world. They're in the news more, of course, and China, fell on some hard times and everything. They had bad loans and some ethical situations, and their manufacturing took a dive. And then their population, of course, was shrinking, and that was partly to blame for that. But, they're giving the U.S. extremely hard competition for the first place, for the economic growth and development in the world. Its largest growth in the world's middle class and they have a huge share of global manufacturing from, you see the range between the 1990s to 2015. Now, one thing that's presenting a challenge to their workforce is automation. So, that's something that I'm sure that they are working aggressively to adjust for. India um, has been, um, we said that if China is well known for its manufacturing advantages, right, what it has been able to do, make the adjustments. India's advantage has been it's their large English speaking population. So, of course, they have emerged technologically and scientifically within their specialization. And so they have a reputation in services such as software engineering and back office accounting systems. And the intelligence agencies in the US have predicted that by the year 2030, India could be the ascending economic power in the world. That's how aggressively they're, kicking tail and pushing through. Where they're seeing that China's working age population was taking a steep decline in 2015. India's, on the other hand, is predicted not to peak until about the year 2050. So yeah, 2050 is when India's working age population is predicted to peak. When we look at Brazil, they have the seventh largest economy in the world. They benefit greatly from mining and agriculture, services, manufacturing. They have a great experience in about a decade of economic and social progress, and that's from 2003 to 2013. So they lifted about 26 million people out of poverty. However, in 2016, they suffered a recession, and it was the worst slump they've had economically in 25 years. So that brought a lot of worldwide declines in their domestic political crisis, commodity prices, and of course their inflation rose. Now, when we look at China, their GDP lags behind, Russia, sorry, look at China. We look at Russia, their GDP lags behind China, India, and Brazil. They've been impeded from changing they have a centrally planned economy, and then they changed to a free enterprise capitalistic economy. But there's some low scores on their future orientation. So, um, you know, it's kind of a gamble. So their monetary exchange is they use rubies and rubles. Goodness, I don't know what's going on with me. And that plunged in '98. So it's making better strides for exchange of that currency. Something else that they faced was an obstacle with their economy was the sanctions that the United States imposed on them in 2017. Now, the under President Trump, of course, those sanctions really weren't applied. They so yeah, we're that's the reason why, if you notice that there's when President Biden came into office, having that early conversation with Putin was vital to clearly demarcate that this is a new administration, and there's just certain things that are just not going to go down, right? The last on the list, last but not least, is South Africa. And out of all of the BRIC countries, it does have the smaller economy it has a growth rate of 1.4%. So, but don't count out South Africa. Amazing country, and it's just finding that economic stimulus, that injection that can help it soar the right way based on what works best for South Africa. But as you can see, it's definitely a major emerging economy. When we look at our cultural differences, culture is the shared set of beliefs, values, knowledge, and patterns that we have with others. So, like tipping in restaurants can vary from country to country. Some people don't tip. Some people, like me, tip at 18 to 30%, depending on how great the service and the food happens to be. You can see that, let's see, I think Brazil, they require all private businesses and government facilities to give people that are age 60 and over immediate and differentiated attention. And if you don't, you can be fined equivalent to $750 for each infraction. And that's awesome. So, so there's some preferential treatment for the seniors, and also with pregnant women and mothers with young children. So it's a prized perk in Brazil and other parts of Latin America, where you have like these long lines and really bad service. And so they're saying, hey, don't have our seniors and our pregnant women and our women with young children waiting in these long lines. Now let's look at some cultural dimensions. We have a low context and high context cultures. Low context cultures are those that share meanings that are primarily derived from written and spoken words. We see this in Germany and Scandinavia, Great Britain, and the US. In contrast, high context cultures rely heavily on nonverbal cues as to another person's official position, their status, or their family connections. So these are another ways in which you can communicate. We can see this in Japan and China and Mexico, Korea, and a lot of our Arab countries. And maybe you can see how business conversations can be different in a low context culture versus a high context culture. So you can go from written and spoken words to situational cues. And so you have to be mindful of these things as well. Now, you can read about the Globe Project in your textbook. It started in 1993 by Professor Robert House. It's an ongoing cross cultural investigation of 9 cultural dimensions that are involved in leadership and organizational processes. And it stands for Global Leadership and Organizational Behavior Effectiveness. And it extends on Geert Hofstede's theory, and it results from about 30 years ago, where you can read about that further in the textbook. And it's evolved as a network of more than 150 scholars from 62 different societies. And most of the researchers are native to the cultures that were being studied. So you see the 9 dimensions that are presented on the left part of the screen. And then there's power distance, which is the degree to which a society's members expect power to be unequally shared. You see assertiveness, which is the extent to which a society expects people to be confrontational and competitive as opposed to tender and modest. Human orientation is the degree to which individuals are encouraged to be altruistic, caring, kind, generous, and fair. So the countries that rank highest and lowest on each dimension are here. And you can see table 4.8 under power distance, which expresses the degree to which a society's members are expect power to be unequally shared. The countries that have the highest dimension of this are Morocco, Argentina, Thailand, Spain, and Russia, while those with the lowest are Denmark, Netherlands, Israel, Costa Rica. And you see South Africa, and it says black sample. Those are the Black South Africans that were sampled for those questions. Where we have uncertainty avoidance, this expresses the extent to which a society, oh, I got tongue tied, relies on social norms and procedures to alleviate the unpredictability of future events. And you see that on the high scale, which is Switzerland, Sweden, and Germany. And this is focusing on the former west part of Germany, Denmark, and Austria, while the lowest on that was Russia, Hungary, Bolivia, Greece, and Venezuela. So you can be able to see through using your text and, of course, comparing to the chart, all of the things. Now, if you're trying to scroll through and you're like, okay, where's the U.S. on here? We rank highest for assertiveness, if that doesn't surprise you, and performance orientation. So performance orientation is where it expresses the extent to which society encourages and rewards its members for performance improvement and excellence. So those are just some of the examples there. Now, some other cultural variations include language. So we have more than 7,000 languages spoken in the world. Interpersonal space is, Americans like to conduct business within basically 3.1 to 3.4 feet of space, compared to Asians where that ranges 3.6 to 4.2. So, communication. Do you treat business as a task, which is what we do in China, or as a relationship? I mean, as we do in China, as we do in the US, or as a relationship as they do in China. And some people may say, oh, I don't treat business as a task, but it is culturally some of the things that we see. It does not mean that that's how you do. It's just a cultural perspective. Time orientation. Doing one thing at a time is monochronic. Doing more than one thing at a time is termed polychronic. And religion, we can see how religion influences our work-related values. And then law and political stability is being aware of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, instability, expropriation, and corruption or labor abuses. Foreign Corrupt Practices Act makes it illegal for employees of U.S. companies to make questionable or dubious contributions to political decision makers in foreign nations. We need to have a Domestic Corrupt Practices Act for the same reasons. Now, expropriation is where a government can seize the assets of a domestic or foreign company. So moving along, I mentioned earlier the expatriate, and that's if you're American living or working in a foreign country. The U.S. State Department estimates that about 9 million U.S. citizens were living abroad in 2016. Of course, the number went up, and then, of course, at some point, the number probably went down a little bit due to COVID. I'm sure some people probably came back home, which possibly also helped further with some of the issues that we had in 2020. But I'm sure that the number is probably still around 9 million of U.S. Citizens living abroad. Now, one study, that I'm sure that also is looking into multi layers of how that number is calculated. Now, there was also a study that showed a high turnover rate for managers who've gone abroad. So about 8 to 25% may leave a company after they return from the U.S. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Some people are not adequately prepared for foreign assignments. There's a lot of cultural differences. You're learning those local customs and norms. And it's really important that companies do a better job of helping with that alignment. Now, you are going to want to refer to this model throughout the course of this semester, which are the KSAs. So, want to make sure that you guys are looking at those so that you're taking your KSAOs and you're building that into your career readiness to have some strong career outcomes. You'll when you look in the textbook at Career Corner about listening and observing, becoming aware of the context, and choosing something basic, right? Trying to learn another language if you plan to work overseas, trying to take the perspective of a person native to the land where you're visiting. And the context refers to the situational or environmental characteristics that influence our behavior. And something else is that just, showing respect and promoting cultural sensitivity is really key. If you really think about if, wearing someone else's shoes, for instance, but thinking about how you would like to be treated. So that is all for now. If you have any questions about this presentation, don't hesitate to send me an email. Thank you, everyone, for an amazing time sharing with all of you. I hope this has been beneficial, and I hope that the questions that popped up on your screen help to not only challenge you but reinforce the learning. Have a great day.